Hi, everyone. Okay. Just a quick announcement before we start the welcome. If you want to share the live stream with folks who cannot be here in the physical space, go to Sins and Ballads Facebook page. We are now live tonight, so go ahead and you can share that. Yes, hello.
Say hello.
Hello. Everybody say hello. So Chucha's going to welcome us to this space right now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Citizen Engagement Lab, or CEL for short. CEL is a co-working environment. We have different types of workspaces for social justice change makers. There are definitely opportunities if y'all want to check out the different spaces or maybe work in the same environment. There are brochures in the front if you want more information. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, or if you're witnessing from the live stream. I also want to thank all the panelists for coming out tonight and the folks who organized tonight's event. My name is Chucha. I am the social media and PR coordinator for Culture Strike. We're really excited and happy to host the event tonight to support the work that Sins and Valid is doing. And really briefly, I'm going to cheat. Culture Strike is a national organization that empowers artists and social justice movements to dream big, disrupt the status quo, and envision a world grounded in shared humanity through art. We leverage the power of culture and creativity to transform sentiment about immigration, honor our environment, and promote human rights. If y'all have any questions, I'll be around. Yeah.
Okay. Hi again. My name is Devi, D-E-V-I, and I'm part of the Peacock Rebellion, so again, welcome. And I mean that, you all, welcome. I'm thinking about all the things our people have to move through to get here. Whether here is at Culture Strike's office, or curled up in bed viewing the live stream, or watching this as a recording, all of that is here. Here at this beautiful panel looking at some intersections and some tensions of disability justice and trans liberation. This event is organized in conjunction with Trans Life and Liberation, an art exhibit at this event space. The art in this space was made by 16 trans and gender non-conforming artists and curated by Micah Bazant. It is part of the Trans Day of Resilience and Trans Life and Liberation art series. So once again, whether it's through your voice or applause or the chat feature, can we show some love to Micah for bringing us all together? Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Sins and Valid, Peacock Rebellion, the Barnard Center for Research on Women, and Culture Strike, and is funded by Akanadi Foundation's beloved community fund. Check them out. We have some accessibility announcements, and they are so precious, you all, so integral to our work together. So we're going to take our time with them.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
First up is our safety team. Our safety team members are wearing red armbands and super cute other outfits. You can see one person over here. There's some folks all around the space. Talk to them if you have any concerns about safety or conflict. Safety team members are available to walk with people short distances to and from the event. Call 510 if you'd like someone to walk with you for safety and or access support, or you can ask your interpreter to call the team. Access team members are wearing purple armbands. Talk to them if you have any access needs or questions. There are 2 Spanish interpreters and 2 ASL interpreters available. There's an audio describer available for any folks with visual impairments who want to check out the art exhibit. There's a fragrance-reduced area through the door to the right of the stage. It's to the right when one is facing the stage area. Through the door on the way to the rooftop patio. People not wearing fragranced products are also welcome to step out on the roof patio. There's a low stimulation, quiet room in the corner office at the end of the suite. Okay. Restrooms, there are 2 gender-neutral ADA accessible restrooms available in the 3rd floor lobby as you enter the suite. This event is being photographed without a flash. If you don't want to be in photos, please indicate that now. You can wave your arm. The photographer, EP Lee, is right over here. Okay. Or you can also let EP Lee know when they're around you. For access reasons, please do not take photos using a flash. It can trigger seizures. Oh, okay, everyone who speaks to the crowd tonight will need to be mic'd, including audience members. That helps Reina and everyone on the live stream participate, and there might be some pauses while we get mics to audience members, so know that that's going to be part of our process tonight. So our moderator for tonight is India, I-N-D-I-A. India Harville, H-A-R-V-I-L-L-E.
There we go.
Is an African-American, radical femme, queer, disabled, social justice organizer, community educator, public speaker, body worker, and mixed ability choreographer and dancer. The unifying thread in India's work is facilitating people working with their bodies as a vehicle for personal and collective growth and transformation. India has had the pleasure of traveling internationally, teaching about disability justice and inclusive dance in a wide variety of settings, including college campuses, social justice organizations, and with the general public. Please show some love to India Harville.
Thank you, everyone. You all look so beautiful tonight. I'm really excited to be here with you, and I have the honor of introducing this amazing panel. So first I'll introduce Patty, P-A-T-T-Y, Berne, B-E-R-N-E. Patty is the co-founder, executive, and artistic director of Sins Invalid. Patty's training in clinical psychology focused on trauma and healing for survivors of interpersonal and state violence. Her professional background includes offering mental health support to survivors of violence and advocating for LGBTQI and disability perspectives within the field of reproductive genetic technologies. Patty's experiences as a Japanese-Haitian queer disabled woman provide grounding for her works creating liberated zones for marginalized voices. She is widely recognized for her work to establish the framework and practice of disability justice. And here to my left, we have Malcolm Shanks. Malcolm, M-A-L-C-O-L-M, Shanks, S-H-A-N-K-S. Malcolm is an organizer, healer, and educator based in New York City. They list Black, gender nonconforming, Muslim, and socialist among their identities. When not bringing old ideas to new people, Malcolm works as a workshop trainer and organizational coach at a radical justice organization in the U.S. And then we have Kiyaan Abadani. Kiyaan, K-I-Y-A-A-N, A-B-A-D-A-N-I. Kiyaan is a disabled and neurodivergent Muslim, trans, queer, diasporic Iranian Swana visual artist, storyteller, and community organizer and cultivator. Kiyaan has been working with Sins Invalid since 2012. And joining us via live stream, we are so pleased to have Reina Gossett. Reina Gossett. Reina is a filmmaker, artist, and an activist in residence at the Bernard Center for Research on Women. She is the director with Sasha Wurtzel of Happy Birthday, Marcia, and of the animated shorts, The Personal Things. In her films and activism, Reina works to reclaim and celebrate the lives, work, and voices of trans women of color and their activism. As the membership director at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project from 2010 to 2014, Reina worked to lift the voices and power of trans and gender non-conforming people. Yes. Give it up for our amazing panel. So now I'd like to turn over the conversation to the panelists and see what we want to talk about regarding this subject.
It's really great to see so many people excited by the intersections that we're talking about, between trans community and trans liberation and disability justice and disabled folks. This conversation is long overdue, and it is so exciting to see people kind of primed and ready for it, because there's been, academic folks have been talking about it for a couple of years. And people in private conversations, we've been talking about who we are as people and how we connect as people, since we've been people. But I feel like the broader left movement has only recently embraced, trans struggles to the extent that it has in the last decade, and disability justice as a framework and disabled people of color. So, we're still courting, people are still not quite sure if disability is like a white thing or if it's, if disability is really just a health thing you have to get over. I think there's still some growth that has to happen for a lot of, broader popular movements. So this conversation is long overdue, and it's really exciting to see people, getting committed. And we've been having this conversation amongst ourselves for a while. So thank you for being here. Any guidance that you want to offer, like a question, it would be helpful.
All right, so
Or anybody.
we'll start off with, how can we reclaim bodily autonomy, our right to exist in public space, and our liberatory visions of a world where all body minds are valued? Easy stuff.
Well, damn. Start us off with the easy questions. How can we
Reclaim our bodies.
bodily autonomy? I don't know the answer to that at all. So I'll start there.
Good answer.
I don't know the answer to that at all. Where I enter that conversation, can I just talk about that? So where I enter the conversation is healing through the process of honoring ancestors and elders, mostly because I think there's a way that there's so much attention paid to where we come from as a way to orient us towards where we're going in public space, and oftentimes those public spaces are oriented around mostly white, cis, able-bodied men, right? And so reclaim, which really just means there's a bunch of upright, standing white men in the middle of public squares all over the place. That's what it really means. It really means that there's a bunch of upright, standing white men looking to see whether I'm paying to go into the subway or not. There's a bunch of upright, standing, cis white, able-bodied men looking to see whether I don't know, any number of places, whether I'm paying to get on the subway, whether I'm paying to eat, whether I'm appropriately dressed. I live across the street from a police precinct, so there are tons of upright, cis white men waiting for me everywhere. And so that's an experience. And so I think naming that is sort of how I enter this conversation about like public space, about just like not feeling safe in public space. Both when we're thinking about honoring those who are past, you know, folks like Andrew Jackson, or folks who are like murdering us in the present, like police officers. So that's how I immediately think about it, or that's how I enter the conversation. And then when I think about venerating ancestors and honoring elders, what that means to me is reclaiming our stories, so that we can maybe then act them out even, both act out like the stories of resistance that our elders and ancestors have, but also in a performance way, but also like when I walk down the street and I see someone suffering injustice and I think about like, what would Harriet Tubman do? Like for me, that is living into the lineage of Black disabled ancestors. You know, and so living into her resistance in that moment for me is a reclamation of public space, because we get to bring in the spirit that everybody else seems to be bringing in when they're, you know, when those upright white police officer men are standing there, they're bringing in the legacy of Andrew Jackson. And so if they're going to bring in the legacy of Andrew Jackson, then I might as well bring in the legacy of Harriet Tubman, and that's how we can all just be channeling our ancestors. Hopefully not weaponizing them, but certainly channeling them so that we can liberate that way. And so that's how I enter.
Yeah, what a great entry. Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to that question?
Is this an opening for me to speak?
I just, you know, I can't go off that way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I first just want to say I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation, to be sharing space with everyone. Tonight, it has been, like Patty said, such a long time coming, and conversations and work and legacies of people who have been shaping spaces like tonight have just been so impactful on my life, and how I move through the world. And so I feel really honored to be part of what's happening tonight. I think one of the things that this question touches on for me and a lot of people who are in New York right now, people who are Black and trans and disabled, or who are used to the constant regulation of our lives being something that happens when we're in public, is the death and the murder of MX Plastic, who was a Black trans person who was killed last week on 29th Street in 7th Avenue in Manhattan. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay. And to me, this is a moment similar to, and it's so powerful to look at everyone here and the portraits of other Black trans people who were killed, and other moments that Micah made. And it's just it feels like a very important moment to name all of the different kinds of regulations and violences, and then also all the different ways that we move through them or we can't move through them in this moment where mixed plastic was killed, right? And the regulation of life, of Black, trans, disabled life, of Black or disabled life is something that is many of us are feeling in this moment. I should just start out by saying. And then I think about, I was really grateful when you talked about the legacy of Harriet Tubman as a Black, disabled, organizing legacy. And I'm thinking also in terms of Marsha P. Johnson, right? Someone who was in a fugitive relationship to the state's morals, the state's idea that we needed to be rational, we needed to be sane, a person who was neurodivergent, who was disabled, who was constantly moving through and in and out of psychiatric institutions and prisons and jails, and doing work within them. And to me, Harriet Tubman, Marsha P. Johnson, people in this room tonight, people like Mix Plastic, the life that's created in the shadow of regulation, that's created in public space, to me is just something that we are defending, we are growing, and I really just want to start off the night by honoring. So I think that's my answer to that question.
Yeah. And Patty, did you say you had something to add?
Yeah, in terms of kind of claiming public space, I think that, that assumes we can enter private, or we can enter public space at all, which, is risk-taking for many of us for so many reasons, and it requires in some way like a willingness to just say, okay, even though it's narrated that I shouldn't even be here, I'm gonna do this because I wanna visit my friend, because I wanna, go eat and with other people, because I wanna claim my space in the world. And for me, that's a really, I don't know not to be pat, but it's an act of love to say, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna go. Sorry, it's provocative for lots of reasons. But it's an act of love to be willing to step out and be seen. And I think I'm showing up in part because I've seen so many demonstrations of love, including all the intent that went into this event, where people are invited to be in all of our many diverse ways together. And it's because of that, love that we can see demonstrated by, our friends, and whether or not we're feeling, in that moment, the power to do that, we can kind of lean on our friends sometimes to help create that space. And it also requires, at least for me, it's funny for people that know me, it would be hard to imagine, but when I first got involved in organizing back, we bumped into somebody on the block here, this man named Howie, who is a professor of medical sociology now at UCSF, and in 1984, I met him as an early baby activist, because I'm only 20, so, I was real baby then. And he and I were reminiscing about, United People of Color, and it was the first organization, to my awareness in the Bay Area, that even used the framework of people of color, because back in the day it was third world people. Anyway, people that knew me back, no, people actually thought I couldn't speak, because I was so afraid to speak in a group of able-bodied folks, when I was 17. It was just kind of overwhelming. And it takes something to be okay, even if I am just visible and learning, I'm gonna do this. And then, to love ourselves enough to do the next step, and the next step. And I think that, engaging in movements where we're held, even if we're held there, it still requires, as we were talking about the other night, you really can't separate what is individual experience from the broader systems of oppression. And it takes saying, okay, even though this is even though there are multiple plans to eradicate many of us, I'm gonna have my own back and take this risk and trust that other people will have my back too, and engage in public spaces. Yeah, I think that's a big starting point for me. And then recently, I've realized that public spaces, rather than my private space, doesn't have to be a place of isolation and shame. Kiyaan and I and several other people did Elliot Kukla, Allie Yates, who else was in the exhibit, Micah. And we did an exhibit called crib bed life, because many of us, you know, will be in our beds and living in some degree of isolation from each other and from public space. And in order to engage, like seriously, I would invite people in my bedroom, in my bed, and it was awesome. And I've rarely been ashamed once I'm in my bed or bedroom, because I'm kind of naturally born, like, you know, very open to people in that way. But organizing from bed was really modeled to me by Laura Hershey, who did a ton of disability rights organizing and was also in the early conversations around disability justice. When I saw her literally organizing like a bunch of cribs when she was in bed on her bench. And so when I started doing that within SINS, I was like, oh, Laura can do that, I can do that. So yeah, like a bunch of the performance that people might have seen in person or on the web stream was organized from bed. And like the photo, you know, the art exhibit was from bed. So again, like this dichotomy of private and public, and then we have to, you know, like, why should I be embarrassed about organizing in my nightgown? Some of us here might be wearing our pajamas and nobody knows it. Right? That's okay.
See some agreement from the audience, some secret pajama wearers coming out.
Yeah. And, you know, we are, like, beautiful in our entirety, which isn't just our public selves, it's who we are as people in our, you know, in the privacy of our own mind. You know, we're still beautiful and amazing. So, yeah, it's not easy, but it is a process that we can engage with.
I love what you shared, Patty. I have a friend who teaches dance from her bed, and she put her bed on wheels and takes it with her and travels around and teaches from that bed. So maybe think of that. Thank you. Kiyaan, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah. As Patty said, we did do the Crib Bed Life series. I'm definitely in private space a lot of the time, or in a hospital or a doctor's appointment more than I'm in public space. So yeah, and I think both of, like, right now we're in collective space, and there's definitely been a lot of intentionality to like have all of our body minds here, and that's very appreciated when we work together, do it as best as we can. Yeah, I think like I don't want to rely on our various, like, especially sick and disabled, queer and trans people of colors, like body minds, to be valued by the white supremacist, ableist, colonial patriarchy. And I appreciate, like, when we put effort into valuing each other and doing that in ways that are like collective, and also just in the little ways we do, someone bringing over a meal, or, you know, when we can't go into, when we're stuck in private space and we can't, you know, when the systems that are present aren't there to, you know, make your life more, to have access to food and interaction and all of that. So I definitely, like, in terms of building that with one another as, you know, getting each other's pronouns right, and when at the doctor's that's not happening. Yeah, so I appreciate the, like, love and care that our communities, you know, attempt to create, however, like, clumsy it can be sometimes and flawed it can be. Like, striving for that feels really important, because I don't want to center the white supremacist colonial patriarchy and relying on that structure to give us value, and yeah, while at the same time fighting it. I get it, but, like, yeah, centering us and doing what we can to show up in both like in the ways that we collectively, like heal, liberate, and strive for accountability and justice with one another.
Reina, I just want to check in. Are you able to hear us still? Great. Thanks for that answer, Kiyaan. I'll ask another question to the panel. As disabled and or trans people whose bodies are pathologized and policed, how can we move together towards collective liberation? One question. It's overlapping a lot with what you've already shared, but what I'm really curious about is what kinds of things you think can move us in the direction of collective liberation and ways that we can be practicing those things together. If you could speak to that a little bit.
I mean, the idea of collective liberation is an idea in my head, and I don't know if it's the same idea as is in the next person's head or the next person, because, we haven't seen that on this soil for many generations. And I think that, so I think in pragmatic, like, okay, what can we do just so that we can be in the same space together? Right? What can we do so that we can be in adjoining spaces together? How can we make, that space, actually, or any space, our space, and how do we expand that hour to be not just, whatever, like one small, like my friends, for example, to like a bigger group and have this sector, and how can this sector, ally with another sector, how do we build a united front? And then again, it gets into this ephemeral space of imagining, because we haven't been able to practice that on this soil. And so for me, in terms of the work that we do at Sins and Valid, it is very much on the practical, like how can we make things accessible in this way, or where can we push ourselves to be more accessible? Where are we falling short of these ideals? Where, what's blocking us from, being able to make this happen? Ironically, so it's one thing, it's just about like actually creating physical spaces, but ironically, adjoining spaces through technology has been something that has been increasingly used with disability community, and I think really usefully and should be used for more and more, public spaces. Like, it's awesome, Reina, that you're here on video. I'm like, why isn't it just common? Like, you see it at a lot of CRIP events, but in non-CRIP events, it's like, oh, that's not going to be okay. It's like, why not? Like, of course, how many lectures have I Skyped into? It's common, and I'm sure the right thinks it's common, because they use the technology quite a bit from what I understand. There's like, by doing it, but I think just there are ways that, we can be in shared space through technology and through, sharing information differently, like ensuring, interpreters are available, and ensuring that food is available, and childcare is available. Like, these things take organizing on the front end, and the payoff is like 1,000 times worth it, So it means like, always having a line item, for example, well in advance. We're not like, because there's an event for people with disabilities, that there's a line item for, people who are linguistic minorities, but always like a big old line item for access in everybody's budgets if you're a nonprofit, or if you're not nonprofit, even better, like have a couple people that are always on the access team that are thinking about how you can increase, access to multiple communities, including disability communities, because obviously every person is different and it's going to have different access needs, but different disability communities are radically different. It's like you can't invite like whatever, like any one racial community as one. You can't invite like all Crips and expect all of us to like roll with the same needs. So, as much as we can, like being thoughtful of the multiplicity of ways that we exist and how we can, build together. And I think most importantly in this is we build, and it's kind of referenced a couple of times already, in a way that's respectful and offers, in honoring of who we are and not the pathologizing of who we are, right? So it's not like, access people should be like, I don't know, if I was experienced, unfortunately I've had experienced too much, like you go to a theater hall and, somebody who's like the access person is like, oh, we have seating for you guys, and literally, not even like speaking to me, but like speaking to like my friend about where people like us should be seated. But, having it just be normal that, of course there's going to be like a place that's accessible for lots of different people. And honestly, that's one of the joys that's been happening with this series, with the Trans Life and Liberation series of events, has been what I'm thinking of, the normalization of access, where it's not, some like, oh, this is this thing that we're doing that's, for special people. No, like everybody needs to get information. It might be in writing, it might be through an interpreter, it might be orally, whatever. It's different. Or some people might, need to eat or not, or whatever. Need to be quiet. Like that's just how we are. We're people. We roll lots of different ways. And I really appreciate that, specifically about you, Micah. And also just, in the spirit of a unified front, like that is one really sweet and important model that we can use with each other.
Thank you. Anyone else want to tackle that question? Reina, I see you jumping up.
Thank you. One of the things that, so I really appreciate the work that Reina's done, really important questions. And I've been trying to think through that, hold a lot of different aspects around them. I think this question for me reminds me of a time in 2012 where there was a lot of conversation happening around getting gender identity disorder out of the DSM. And one of the things I think that conversation was really impactful, and especially as it was led by trans and gender nonconforming people who were disabled in prison. And where I was working at the time was the Solidarity Law Project, and also there was an organization called Rights for Imprisoned People with Psychiatric Disabilities, RIP, who I feel like were really centering the narratives, the voices, the experiences of people who were trans, gender nonconforming, in really heightened regulated institutions like prisons, psych hospitals, jails, detention centers, were accessing Social Security. And one of the things that was happening in a lot of our conversations was about this push to say that gender identity disorder should be removed from the DSM, right? That trans people needed to stop being pathologized, and that having gender identity disorder in the DSM was a stigmatization, and that we trans people are crazy, right? There was like this big push at this time to say like trans people aren't crazy, right? And I think one of the really important parts of that conversation that was really pushed by people who were currently and are still currently incarcerated was about, yes, we should not be pathologized, yes, we should not be regulated by the medical industrial complex. And also, it's really important to listen to how we are leveraging diagnoses like gender identity disorder in order to access the care that we need in places that are already so regulated, like prisons and jails. I remember when I was at SRLP, that was one of the few ways that people we worked with who were part of the prison advisory committee were able to get a specific kind of trans-related healthcare by having that diagnosis. And so to me, that having a conversation about GID out of the DSM was so important for to happen through a disability justice. And at the time I was SRP, First Economic Justice, and I was really around and being so deeply impacted by DJC work that was happening. To me, this was a moment that really, it was so necessary to have conversation between and around those of us who were trans, disabled, who were moving with a disability justice framework, and also people who were most vulnerable to the push, which some people might call an assimilationist push, to say like we're not crazy, right? We're all sane people. And so I think that's a moment that I just wanted to bring up in the conversation where it just makes so clear that the binary between it's a false binary, right? It's a false choice to talk about disability justice as not inextricably linked to trans, right? So that's one way that I was thinking about that conversation, and just really the kind of deadly effects that assimilationist pushes have on us, right? Like I think one of the things that so many of us are witnessing in this moment, and I was talking about Rick's plastic just earlier before, and I just, because of the way the cameras I'm seeing all these brilliant people in front of all these really painful portraits, and I just can't help but think about the landscape of trans and gender nonconforming people of color being killed right now, and the highest documented rates ever, right? At the same time as trans is being celebrated, quote unquote, in pop culture in an incredibly visible way, right? So we're having these two kinds of contradictory and both incredibly harmful things happening. And for me, the way I'm thinking about it is partly what are the violences of assimilation, right? When people are pushed out of the movement, pushed out of the community, pushed out of the idea of what transgender nonconforming is, right? If it's not crazy, what is the impact on those of us who are crazy, right? If it's not disabled, what is the impact on those of us who are disabled, right? And I think we're seeing the impact, right? These are life or death questions. These are about who will be arrested, who will be detained, who will be deported, who will have to navigate incredibly regulated spaces. And to me, I think that's just in one way that is thinking about this question.
Thank you. I think Patty is going to piggyback on that just a little bit.
Well, and I think I so hear what you're saying, Reina, and one of the things I think that when our stories and our lives get essentially tokenized and put, on sitcoms and whatnot, it creates this air of safety, or this not air, it's like a myth, a falsehood that, it is safe for us to, be public about, so many things that we've been attacked for, or that, our lives are are being held in regard everywhere all the time. And that's just not true. It's not true that everywhere we can, be, queer or gender non-conforming and disabled and brown and disabled. Just being, any one of those identities could get us killed on a road trip across the U.S. It's not just because we're on TV for a minute does not make it a safe continent for us. Or even, going to the hospital, which is supposed to, that makes me think of what you're saying, Kiyaan, about, where these systems that we try to navigate and that are supposedly there to support us are the places where we are most pathologized, right? And most, and this can be from a hospital setting to like the Social Security office, you know, where we have to perform disability or not eat, you know, if we don't get these funds, you know, it's actually not a particularly, I don't know, put it in a negative, it's a hostile environment, it's a hostile to death environment for many of us. And yeah, the culture, if you look at like pop culture, it's as though, oh, it's all good, you know, everybody's recognized and it's safe, and you know, it's, you know, we're all just, you know, building global unity through yoga. And yeah, no, that's not actually happening.
And I think Malcolm's gonna jump in as well.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently again, because I don't think that they're contradictory at all. This supposed like hyper visibility of trans people, both within like statistics about hate violence and also in popular culture. Because I think about the fact that like there's not a single global popular cultural form that hasn't been like either informed or invented by people in the Black diaspora, and how none of the wealth that gets created from that multi-billion-dollar industry accrues to Black people at all. And more than that, it actually requires the criminalization of Black people. Like the criminalization of Black people is like the vehicle for the production of Black culture under capitalism. And I think there's a very similar thing that happens in trans communities and to trans people. It's like actually the marginalization that creates the culture that people then incorporate into the culture in order to create more wealth for themselves, right? And so those two things go really, really hand in hand for me. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Like, I think like, it's the economy, you know, like it's like kind of a weird argument to make, but I really do think that there's something about like, there's something about how the violence creates an experience that people fetishize,
Yes.
you know, and then people value the cultural products of that violence, so much so that they are actually willing to continue to increase that violence again and again and again in order to create more value and more wealth for themselves. And I hope that's not too cynical. And that actually relates to what I was thinking about this question, which is that, that question makes me really sad, because in general in my life I'm really sad right now, like, sad. Just like, I actually feel further from collective liberation than I have at any point in my career as an organizer or as a person who's paid attention to political change. Right? And so what I really need right now for collective liberation is like organizing work shares, you know? It's like, when like, I totally get I think I'm really excited about the idea of organizing from bed, but recently when I've been in bed, it's usually been like wallowing, crying, like not working, not organizing at all. And at the same time, right, like I'm being told, like there are all these scripts in the back of my head that are like, any minute that you're crying instead of like in your Facebook DMs answering messages is a minute that you're abandoning your people who are in deep crisis right now, right? And so what I think collective liberation for me right now looks like us being able to like tap out, you know? Us being like, here's the organizing job that has to happen. So-and-so gets like 2 sad comp weeks, you know? like depression comp time would be really, really wonderful right now. To just know that I'm not like straight up abandoning our people who are like dying and like who are being deported and who are being detained and who need protection getting home, who need food, who need water, who need all sorts of things, because I know I can trust that someone else is doing it because someone else has been like, hey, I got you, I'm gonna do that, you go be sad for a minute.
Yes.
Or as long as you need to, you know. I guess the one good thing about this moment is that there are more and more people ever who are like, yes, things need to change. Welcome, thank you for being here. I'm so glad you finally arrived. I'm gonna hand over this baton to you so that I can actually burn the fuck out, you know? So I can actually be burned out, you know? Yeah. That's what collective liberation looks like for me right now in my head.
Tag, I'm out, and you're in. I hear that. Kiyaan, did you want to add anything?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kiyaan. Can you speak a little louder for us?
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, I think resting and being able to fall apart, like, it's important to appreciate that being said, and just, yeah, I think, when it comes, yeah, I think collective liberation is definitely this ongoing, complicated, multi-layered process, and it's hard to get super, like, reductive about it. But, yeah, I think that in, like, to speak specifically about disability as just like a lens, even though we're all holding all of these things all of the time, and again, it gets erased, the people who have the, you know, when the Black Indigenous people who have the most police violence done is, there's a lot of disabled people within that group. It's like probably over 50%. So, you know, without the false lines between all of this, you know, and I come from a family, you know, I come from like a war, you know, a family who's been through war, and you know, my mom was a nurse on the border of Iran and Iraq during that war, and that all, you know, that which was also influenced by you know, U.S. imperialism creates you know, creates disability, right, in the descriptive, like, in the descriptive aspect of the term. And also, yeah, like, one of the things I've appreciated from working with SINs and being in SINs is that there's a politicization of disability, and just in disability community in general, like, holding the fact that it's also a thread that, again, we all hold it intersectionally in these various ways where it's political, like, it's a political, I still feel like it's hard sometimes in terms of, like, when, you know, when we have these one-on-one talks, or when I'm working with a group of people that aren't disability justice oriented, and having to say that, like, you know, and having to basically be like, oh, this is a political identity as well, with like a history that involves like a large group of people, or like a culture and a history, and again, like, within that, there's like, it's a multi-clustered group, right? And we have all overlaps, but I think it feels important for, again, as Patty mentioned earlier, like, it not just be relegated to health or self-care, or, you know, all of that, like, it being, in terms of, yeah, like, when our various communities are talking about liberation, like, to hold that it's, to really hold that it's political, because sometimes, yeah, even when people, yeah, so basically just like, because a lot of the times when we're getting into conversations with one another, like, it feels stuck on ableism, one-on-one. And we're trying to still be like, hey, that's the medical model, and I appreciate that there's conversations where we're trying to move beyond that for our collective, for when it comes to that thread for collective liberation, and yeah.
Reina, I've seen some vigorous head nodding around a few points that were raised. Do you want to share anything else?
No, I'm loving listening, and I'm really, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Patty, did you want to give us another comment?
I think everyone is literally here to hear you speak.
And he is the moderator, okay? I wanted to look at her meta view of the panel anyway. Yeah, I mean, just to riff off of what you're saying, Kiyaan, it's interesting to watch the development of the left and to see now there's the idea of health justice and how there's a desire for people with disabilities to align, for example, with like health justice activists and or like the self-care track somewhere. And well, that's important, absolutely. To me, I'm like, well, since our bodies are inherently anti-capitalist, why aren't we being invited to ally more with anti-capitalist forces? Like that would make as much sense, if not more, than, like I can't do yoga under the best circumstances, I'm sorry. That's fucking happen. Like, my impairment is I'll figure it out. I will figure out how to negotiate my impairment with the people that I choose to. But the conditions that are disabling to create disability, that's about capitalism, and that's something I want to do publicly. And the construction of my body as erratic or unproductive because I don't produce in a normative way, that is the crux of disablement, and it's also the crux of capitalism, and it's the crux of exploitation of bodies as factors in production as a normalized thing, which it shouldn't be, which is what engendered the slave trade to begin with, and what keeps and props up the whole framework of like reproductive control. I mean, that is what is political about these intersections, not the fact that we all need to take tinctures. I mean, I'm big on tinctures, like seriously. No, we took some on the way here, really. Like my body is very important to me, and I love it, and it's hot, and it's juicy, and I willingly share it as much as I can. And like, I'm not going to go to a conference, well, maybe sometimes, but not generally, not a left conference about that. Like, I really want to use my analytical framework to really undermine the systems that are most impacting us collectively, and that really is, where capitalism meets ableism and meets white supremacy and meets imperialism, and ways that our individual lives have been, or our families have been colonized in ways in which we're trying to decolonize ourselves and our bodies. Like, that to me would be a great move, for the left to be able to take, so that we can, actually start fighting from a place of, I feel like, clarity of analysis, right, where there isn't a separate analysis that is, for the unhealthy or the sick, like it's this false dichotomy between health and and the political or individual and the political. I think that the anti-capitalist, my point is, the anti-capitalist tenet of disability justice, to me, is like the most central. and the most connecting.
Yes, thank you.
And,
Oh, yes, go ahead, Kiyaan.
okay, and just, yeah, like, I think adding to the anti-capitalism, like the precursor to that feels like colonialism, and like that being the birth of word eugenics, and all of the eugenics culture started, so I just wanted to like add that as an addendum, just that, like, yeah, that's where, that, yeah, colonialism is where it is, where the eugenic thought started and is increasing, and all, and it exists in all the various ways it still does. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and just kind of like, I know you said like, oh, we always feel like we have to do 101, but I want to make sure that 101 is happening for anybody who's like watching and is like, what does that even fucking mean? Like, literally, before white people came elsewhere and were like, whatever you're doing is wrong, and also the reason that we're going to steal your land, your people, and your money, and your wealth, and everything that you own, and everything that you have, and every way that you create meaning around it. Before that happened, in many, many societies around the world that were pre-capitalist or had tried out capitalism, or like, we don't really fuck with this, right? Like gender variance, as well as bodily variance and bodily diversity was a thing that was like valued for spiritual and community power, right? There were like many, many places in which there was not only like spiritual and community power behind it, but also like spiritual and community labor that was used to create and maintain the communities. And so when colonialism came in and was like, these bodies are not valuable to us by throwing Black disabled people over the ship into the Atlantic to be at the bottom, right? In order, when Vasco Nunez de Balboa like came to what is now Panama and burned Two-Spirit people as witches immediately, right? When folks came in and did that kind of violence, what they did was not only like disrupt the spiritual power of those experiences, but also like totally upend how societies organize themselves around those very, very central kinds of labor, right? There were things that could not be done, that needed to be done, that were not getting done. And so societies in many ways fell apart. So in many ways, Satanism, ableism, transphobia undergird like not only capitalism, but also the dissolution and the destruction of communities of color around the globe historically. And I feel like that really, really needs to be spelled out here because when we're talking about the economy, I feel like there are two things that are popping up. Some people are starting a progressive politics where like we need to socialize everything, socialize medicine, socialize the environment, socialize this, socialize that, but there's also like a decolonization thing that needs to also be there that I feel like is like why we're all here, right? That I just really want to spell out because I think it's so important.
That's so beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. So we'll take a few more comments from the panelists before we turn over for audience questions. Is there anything anyone wants to add? Reina, is there something you'd like to add in closing?
No, I mean, I think that I don't know if I could add anything. I think what I'm feeling in this moment, and just, yeah, I feel like we can't say enough of like colonialism being one of the biggest obstacles, right, to trans and disabled liberation, right? So those logics underpinning institutions like the hospital, right? Underpinning institutions like the prison or the deportation center that create ways, create norms through which people enact ableism and transphobia and anti-Black racism upon each other, right? And then have those kinds of logics move through us, right? And ultimately, in my life at least, create incredible amounts of isolation, right? So colonialism and those institutions and the norms that are created from those institutions and how they move through me, like isolation, I feel like is one of the biggest things that I just always feel like I need to name conversations about ableism, disability justice, anti-black racism, and transphobia. You know, like those are, and those all are a part of one. So I just really appreciate everyone on the panel saying and naming in all of those many important ways.
Thank you. Anyone else with closing comments before we take audience questions?
I'm a trans, queer, neurodivergent, non-binary trans woman with PTSD. And I just wanted to share that in regards to We Move Together, I'm co-organizing a new monthly queer trans improvisational dance night in Oakland that emphasizes consent, centers leadership, and embodiment for disabled folks, trans folks, fat folks, and folks of color, especially those who hold many. Sorry, I'm just, trying to be, nervous. And so you can ask me about that. And it's wheelchair accessible in the space and ADA compliant, trans improv. So I'm Allie, but we're one of 6 people in the body. So we're multiple, we're the Redwoods. We're 6 people living co-consciously in the same body. We're also living in a trans body. Multiple just refers to folks who are many people living in one body. You might have heard of dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, but for a lot of folks similar to GID or hysteria or homosexualism, diagnosis is useful for a lot of folks, but GID definitely misses the point for a lot of us. And if you're trans and multiple, you're often rejected on both sides. When we were first coming out as trans and multiple, in a lot of trans groups, folks were like, you're not trans, you're crazy. Or you just have some other problem. A lot of folks spoke up for us and defended us and included us, but it's definitely a thing. And you educate and you educate and you educate and it gets a little better. And then you go into some of the few multiple spaces in the country, a few conferences dominated by clinicians, pretty well paid, and transphobia is right there. Your parts aren't real. This is different than trans. Oh my God, transitioning? If you're many people, how could you possibly be sure? And in that question is the implicit concept that being multiple is bad enough. And why would you risk being trans too? But we are multiple and we are trans. My name's Z. And you come out as multiple to your trans care provider and your access to hormones get blocked. Because M. Night Shyamalan made a $200 million movie this year that perpetuated the fear of somebody hijacking the body and doing horrible things to oneself and to others. And this is not rare. It's 1 to 3% of the population is the expectation, but it's higher. It's 20 to 30% in homeless populations. So I just want to say one last thing, and then I'll frame it as a question. When we're sharing this as a white body, shielded from many things with our class privilege, but when we were in the psych ward for the first time, a 17-year-old black fat femme pulled us aside and said, don't tell anyone, but I'm 12 people in the body, and I'm going to tell you how to survive. And that was 3 weeks in, and it's 5 years later, and we're still surviving on that advice. We know there's a lot of incarcerated multiples. There's a lot of homeless multiples who can't share. So coming from this like super niche, nuanced, maybe 20, 30 years until folks understand this even as much as trans folks, how can momentum be built and around people who feel like they're the only ones organizing as their particular experience and its own particularities? And how can that be as intersectional as possible? Thank you.
So I'll repeat the question. Given like a particular very niched experience of certain intersections of disability, trans identity, saneism and other things, how can we build movements that are intersectional inside of those particular experiences, especially when we feel isolated or like we're one of few people organizing from that place? Did I paraphrase that well?
Yeah, and maybe there's 20 years. Like it feels like a long time in the future until you'll have understanding.
Sure.
This is why I'm always afraid of panel Q&As, because I'm like, I actually, again, don't know the answer to building momentum, except through coalitions. Is except through coalitions, especially in isolating experiences. Thank the divine for that black fat femme in your life years ago, because they're clearly moving through you right now, and that's really exciting. And that's pretty damn strong coalition, I would say. And that is pretty much all that I can like offer in terms of like advice, you know? It's just like coalitions with other people who feel isolated are pretty much the only way in my place to survive, just starting with giving with like, I need what I need, you need what you need, let's just make sure we can both get it. And then if we develop some sort of political analysis about why we don't have it, then great. And in the meantime, what we do have is what we need to survive.
And Patty, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for both sharing your experience and asking the question. And I mean, I remember, you know, back when I was early organizing, and there was no mention of disability amongst racial justice organizers. There was no mention of queerness amongst racial justice organizers. There was, you know, and you know, amongst people that were doing organizing against patriarchy, there was no, you know, there wasn't a strong race analysis. And I mean, it was a very different political landscape in the early 1980s. And so I talked to myself a lot. And I wrote in margins of books. And I would read it back to myself because, you know, who else was I going to read it to? And I wrote love letters to myself. And I kind of I mean, how do you, like, it makes me think of the idea of prefigurative. You know, like we have this prefigurative vision, and for all of us that are engaged in, I think, a hope for justice and work toward justice, like what we're working on is a vision that we have yet to have tangible, right? Like one foot is in the future and one foot is now, and you know, sometimes that coalition or the others that we might work with have yet to manifest. You know, like the idea of collective liberation has yet to manifest, but I just need, you know, for me, at least as an individual, I need pleasure, for sure. Because, you know, if we're going to be honest plain in the body, you know, chocolate for me, you know, good, you know, fat, salt, sex, all the good things. And, you know, and like feeding the hope of, you know, like that's what my body needs, but also for my political imagination. Like I need to feed my political imagination as much as I feed my visceral desires. Because one of the things that capitalism has done, and I'm sure I read this in a quote from someone somewhere, it has, you know, co-opted and stolen the political imagination. And I feel, I have felt the need to reclaim that, hold on to that, and reclaim that. And really, that's where Sins Invalid was born, was wanting to manifest some out-picturing, you know, of the political imagination for what could be. Yeah.
I want to respond to what you said earlier. For me, I think I met the first person I knew who was multiple in college. They thought I was multiple too, and I was and wasn't, and it was complicated. And I remember it's like for me, I have some diagnosis and I have some stuff not diagnosed. And it's like keeping it very secret and very like, that's how I'm not hospitalized by my parents. But it's also like feeling like I was going crazy, yet also feeling like I want to own my crazy. Like to see my crazy as like a gift in a sense. And I think it was from daring to share in personal spaces, because at first I would just whisper, like I'll bring like a friend into my like bedroom, and then I would like whisper, "I'm disabled." And then later it became more of like a shout, but not quite a shout. And I think later on someone told me that she was multiple too, and she was really glad she met me because she felt really alone. And like I gave her words that she didn't think she had. So in some ways, like I've encountered people I never thought I'd encounter through daring to say out loud. And in a sense, this is my first time saying it out loud in such a huge group, so it's kind of nerve-wracking and also anxiety-inducing kind of. And what I'll say is, part of it is trying not to feel like it's a confessional at some point, where you just feel like you're just overspilling at some point. And part of it also is coming through thinking at least 4 femmes in my life, where I've learned a lot around how to move through the world without with trauma lens, as in like fueled by trauma, but also trying to acknowledge my trauma is there in many ways, with regards to how I heal and how I move, and how people will push things that they consider healing for me, but it was more traumatizing. That's what I want to say. Does anyone want to speak to?
Thank you for sharing that with us for our first time. Are there any questions on the floor?
Hello, my name is Inez. I'm thinking about your first question around body autonomy, what was said around being anti-capitalist and decolonizing disability, CRIP as a political identity, and I was really drawn and attracted to the idea of anti-assimilationism. I'm thinking like that's maybe why disability justice movement is still like so punk or whatever, because they can't assimilate in the same way. And so I just wanted to have the panel speak to maybe strategies for anti-assimilationism or successes. Like I see Sins Invalid as something that's really holding all of these things of decolonization, anti-capitalist, body autonomy. Are there other successes or examples or strategies or questions around this that you guys are wrestling with, anti-assimilationism?
I mean, I think this question, and also what Patty just said, keeps bringing me back to like the principle of self-determination, right, or Kuchitaglia, or you know, that the people who are most vulnerable to a particular form of oppression are powerful and capable of transforming the world, right? And should be at the center of leadership, at the center of transformation. And I think, to me, self-determination, the principle of self-determination, is such an important way to push back against assimilation, right? The idea that someone who has more access to wealth, to formal kinds of education, who might not be in prison or have experiences navigating the prison industrial complex or hospitals or group homes, like people with more access are going to be the people who we need to highlight and center and build a wide platform around, right? I think, to me, the principle of self-determination really pushes that back, right? It really challenges the idea of what a successful movement is, what a successful leadership is, and even the idea of success, right? I think the like our notions of time, of disabled time, of crip time, of like crazy people time are really challenged by self-determination. And I think, to me, thinking about and feeling through how self-determination for me means really ensuring the leadership of people who are most vulnerable, right, to these violences. It's just the starting place of where I think about assimilation and ways like how we can do self-defense, right, against the violence of assimilation. And then I was thinking about Patty saying prefigurative, right, and like my ears perked up. And I was thinking about Pat. Can you hear me?
No, we missed something for a moment. Can you go back? Patty said what?
Oh, I was thinking about prefigurative politics.
Thank you.
Right? Yeah, like the ways that we engage or support or challenge the conditions or what we're reproducing or what we're produced in, as my friend Tina always likes to talk about. Like the ways that we do that through our relationships with one another, that to me is what prefigurative politics is, right? We're modeling, we're creating what we want to live through, what we want to live within, right? What we want our conditions to be, and we're staying within our conditions. So to me, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking really specifically about, Patty was talking about desire and sex, and I'm like, maybe it's the Scorpio full moon, but it just feels really important to name in a conversation about disability, justice and trans liberation, disabled liberation, sex and desire. And I was just thinking, you know, one of the things to me that also I think really pushed back, you know, or amplified my like self-defense against assimilation is kind of realizing that, you know, it's like a thing that I have to remind myself every day because we still live within colonialism and white supremacy and ableism and anti-Black racism and fat phobia, all of the things, Satanism, right? That like my Blackness, my disabled life and my trans life, right, are not separate from my beauty. Like it's a constant kind of reminder that I have to do with myself that I feel like also really pushes back against pushes back against assimilation and helps me stay within the principle of self-determination.
Thank you. Malcolm, I think you were going to add something?
Yeah, I think it was mostly. Reina basically just said it. So I think the part about just remembering that like being included is not actually safety for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the intersection of sex work and if any of y'all had anything about that. And like we talked about it, or I mean y'all talked about it a little bit, but homelessness within it all. So yeah. Also, Reina, I'm a big fan and I'm really excited for the happy birthday, Marsha. Yeah.
It's late in New York and it's past my bedtime, so and my cat friend Jean has been biting me, so underneath where like the camera is, and Jenny's supporting me to have that experience of me just talking to everyone without all my attention on Jean. So that's one thing that's going on for me. But I think one of the things that I was trying to talk about at the beginning was about the regulation of public space, right? And as the regulation of disabled life and Black life and queer and trans life and poor life, and absolutely of life that's created by and with and through sex work, right? And how that is not separate at all from the portraits of the people who are sitting underneath right now, right? How violence against sex work as inextricably linked to violence against disabled people and Black people and transgender non-conforming people within public space is something that shapes the landscape upon which we're having this conversation right now. And that, to me, feels so important to always name, to always feel, and always reflect on, and also, you know, to think about how mixed plastic was deeply impacted and killed because of those kinds of overlapping violences, right? Or Marsha P. Johnson, who we talked about a little while ago before, right? Or just like so many, disabled and Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people who are taking up space in all different ways. Maybe it's online, maybe it's in homes, maybe it's in public. But I think in one thing, that happened in New York City a while ago, right, in the 60s and 70s, was the enforcement of anti-cross-dressing laws, right? The idea that if you were a trans and nonconforming person, you had to wear 3 articles of clothing that's associated with the gender you assigned at birth, right? So if you were what they understood to be a trans woman, you had to wear 3 articles of male's clothing, or for trans men, you had to wear 3 articles of women's clothing. And obviously, it wasn't a binary like that. It was just the police in the city reinforcing the gender binary, right? So to me, one of the ways that I know that trans life, and not separate from disabled life and Black life, has always been regulated is through anti-cross-dressing laws, right? And that is something that was used specifically to capture and deeply violate and push down life of sex workers, right? So people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and people in Star were all, street queens, were all selling sex to support each other and grow life around that. And so for me, who's as a person who wouldn't be alive without other people in my own experiences of doing sex work, I always think about how important the regulation of public space, and specifically the regulation of disabled people and trans people and gender nonconforming people who are selling sex in public, how that impacts and shapes the landscape, right? And certainly this discussion today. Was that clear? I can't, because I'm Skyping. Yes, okay, cool, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything about that question? And Patty's got a comment.
And yet another disgusting and, overlap of kind of patriarchal extension of control, thinking about the laws of articles of clothing. It makes me think of the ugly laws, where people who were visibly impaired were essentially forced into isolation. And, all this, to me, these tie together through, patriarchal, and kind of embedded within that kind of white cis patriarchal control or attempts to control bodies, and all bodies, any body that's varying from, whatever the historical moment is determining as, worthy of consuming, pieces of the economy. And it's interesting because I think that's tied into the isolation that's created because, it's interesting, a lot of folks with disabilities have done sex work, and a lot of folks obviously in multiple communities have done sex work, but what's interesting is hearing stories from disabled folks who have done sex work and where we have to hide our disabilities, or our disabilities become fetishized, right? One or the other, where, we're either doing it on the phone or doing it, where we're highlighting a wheel or a cane or something. And, these, the kind of, the fetishization / scorn is, yet another, relationship that patriarchy holds with many communities. It's kind of hurting my tummy a little bit because it is, The Handmaid's Tale or whatever on Hulu. It's not really the framework from which I find power in myself, and I really like to hold on to I mean, my body's been narrated as problematic from day one, right? So I really like to hold on to my body as a site of pleasure as much as possible, as opposed to a site of problem, which is one of the reasons that, you know, again, food, sex, all the good things, like, are really important to me, because they're political acts as well as just good and like reasons to be alive. And for me, that's, you know, keeping, so I think I will I've never actually said this, I think, in public, which is interesting. But I did sex work for 4 years, and when I can hold that, when I was able to hold the work in a relationship of power, was far fewer times, I think, than when I was able to, for me, than when I was able to hold it in a, you know, because essentially you're a worker, and essentially, like, you're on somebody else's dime, and, like, you know, it wasn't like a collectively empowering experience as a worker, right, like many of our workplaces. So, you know, I really like my sexuality to be in a place where I am in consent and not mediated through the economy, you know, and that's not always possible, but yeah, I like to enjoy myself off of anyone's dime.
Either of you two want to add anything, or?
One thing that's occurring to me, I guess, is a story that's reminding me of how, like, sex work is oftentimes how folks come into, in the work that I've done of trying to find ancestors and trying to be less isolated across time space, I guess. Sex work is often how, like, trans and gender nonconforming people have actually, like, left their footprint in history, because it's when we come into interaction with the state by being criminalized. But I think I'll tell the story and then, okay. So there's a story about someone who had multiple names, Antonio and Victoria, and I'm just gonna call them Victoria. Victoria was kidnapped from the Bight of Benin in, like, the 1540s by the Portuguese and brought to Lisbon in Portugal, where she was promptly enslaved. Victoria was given, like, the clothing of a man and rejected it, and proceeded to, like, wear a variety of things, including, like, a leather vest and a long white gown and a white head wrap that was more how they would have dressed in West Africa, and then set up shop as a sex worker in Lisbon. And it was actually not her sin that brought her into my knowledge, but her popularity, right? And so that's, I think, a really important thing that I want to note, is that, like, sex work is really powerful work, and that I'm really thankful that she was doing that work and clearly doing it very well, or at least in the way that many people liked, because it was the only reason that the Catholic authorities wanted to prosecute her. And it's the only reason I was able to hear about her. And it was the first instance of gender variance in the African diaspora that I actually ever saw written down, right? And so without sex work generally, I know that none of us would be in this room. And that's just a fact. Without sex work, none of us would be in this room. Yeah, I guess that's where I'll leave it. Yeah.
If folks haven't read much of Aurora Levens Morales' work, I would highly, highly recommend it. Yeah, Aurora Levens Morales, AurorLevins Morales. And she writes a piece called Bombazo, where she talks about the ways in which in Puerto Rico, she's a Puerto Rican Jewish author, brilliant teacher, and she writes about essentially the organizing that was happening in Ponce, Puerto Rico, that was resulted in the incarceration. Let me say it again. Women were being incarcerated for sex work, for any number of reasons, including just speaking their minds. And while incarcerated, that was one of the sites where political opposition was most kind of hot. And she writes about it in a really lyrical way, much more so than I can speak it. So if people haven't read any of her work, particularly Bombasso, she writes really beautifully about African-descended organizers that were incarcerated, that were also sex workers, that were also labeled and pathologized because their bodies were considered disabled / diseased, and treated horribly as a result by the public authority doctors, they were called.
Thank you all for sharing your answers, and thank you to the panelists for everything that they brought tonight. I feel like we just skimmed the surface of this conversation, and we need to do this for another 7 or 8 or 10 hours, not straight through. We take lots of breaks and rest and all those kinds of things, because we need that as well. But I'm glad that the conversation got started here, and so thank you to the panelists again.
In conjunction with this event, Sins Invalid and the Barnard Center for Research on Women just released 2 videos about learning about ableism and disability justice. The first one is called My Body Does Not Oppress Me, Society Does. And the second one is called Ableism is the Bane of My Motherfucking Existence. These videos feature Patty Berne, Pattyberne, and Stacy Milburn, Staceymilbern. They're available on Sins Invalid's Facebook page, on the Facebook event page, as well as YouTube and Vimeo. We hope you'll check them out, along with future releases that are part of the series. The live stream will be archived on the Sins Invalid Facebook page, and thank you to the more than 2,500 people who are watching the live stream tonight.